Up next, David Perkins and Smiles Lewis present UFOs, Cattle Mutilations, and the Gaian Mind.
All right, folks, welcome back. I'm Smiles Lewis, and we've got a special joint presentation that's actually just going to be more of a discussion and exploration of an idea that's been near and dear to my heart for a long time. And there's not very many people who talk about this. And one of those people is my good friend, David Perkins, who I'll be bringing on momentarily. David Perkins has been an active paranormal researcher for the past 25 years. Actually, it's more than that. This is an old bio, investigating everything from cattle mutilations to underground alien bases. He's a 1968 graduate of Yale University, majoring in American Studies and Political Science. As a writer-journalist, he has investigated UFOs, cattle mutilations, and paranormal phenomena since 1975. Perkins has written articles that have appeared in Boulder, Taos, and High Times magazines, as well as numerous newspapers and research journals. He is the founder of Western Spirit magazine. He has published a book, Altered Stakes, published by Am Here Books. He also wrote the forewords to Christopher O'Brien's books, The Mysterious Valley and Enter the Valley. David's articles on cattle mutilations, Darkening Skies, was included in the fantastic UFO 1947 to 1997 from John Brown Publishing, an anthology of the world's leading authorities on UFOs. David has been featured on the Art Bell radio show and appeared on numerous television and movie documentaries, including A Strange Harvest, Sightings, High Strange, New Mexico, The Mutilation Files, and many others. It is my distinct pleasure to bring on my good friend, David Perkins. David, hey, how you doing?
Miles, all right. How you been?
Doing good. Oh, I'm getting warm by your fire.
I started a fire in my TV set just for this.
No. That's what it's good for, you know.
Yeah, pretty fakey.
Well, you know, I don't know that really. A lot of people may not have heard about this idea, and I'd like for you to give an introduction. I know that I would just say that my ideas about this were largely inspired by or informed by yours, but at the same time, I would say that I kind of arrived at some of the same tentative conclusions that I think you have. I'm not saying I'm 100% on board, but I think it's one of my favorite ideas, and I really am looking forward to discussing it in more depth with you because it never gets discussed. So,
yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to show you a little tidbit. See if you can see this.
Oh, yay! My good friend Mac White did that. That poster. It's actually based on an Aztec mummy film template, and then for the upper part, that's a great gem of a historical artifact there.
I just found that, along with my all access pass. It might come in handy sometime.
Yes.
Saucer pilot. That's me. But I was just thinking about this, Smiles, back in 2001, and this got derailed by 9/11. But just think about Robert Anton Wilson, Jenny Randalls, Patrick Weege, Carl Flock, Ken Thomas, Greg Bishop, David Perkins, James Mosley, Mac White, Tom Dooley, Lauren Coleman, Pamela Stonebrook, Ed Conroy, Dennis Stacy, Miles Lewis, and more. Wow. What would have happened if we'd been able to do that? The world would be a different place. Or not. Might be better, might be worse. Probably about the same. One thing about that is that we also had another conference scheduled called the Emergence Conference that was going to be in Palenque, Mexico. This was the idea of my friend Chris O'Brien, his brother Brendan, and we were going to go down there and sit around the pool at Palenque for a week in November. And I talked John Keel into going down. Antonio Huneas was going to escort him, and we're going to have a lot of people in the field that are familiar names. And Tracy Torme, my friend Nancy Talbot, and some Mexican ufologists and some Mayan elders. And I'm just so sorry none of that ever came to pass. But here we are 20 years later, still doing it. Still trying to figure it out. But I, just as a very brief synopsis, I don't want to get too hung up in it, but I assume that our listeners, watchers, viewers are somewhat familiar with cattle mutilations. And if you're not, you're really missing something. But I recommend, this is my Stalking the Herd by Christopher O'Brien, big old thick 600-page book, which is the go-to book on this particular subject. And he, I worked with him closely on this book and contributed all my files and my databases and my solicited and unsolicited advice. So we put that together, but that is the most authoritative source that anybody will find on this subject. Excuse me. Just a very thumbnail sketch. We're talking about a phenomenon that started, at least came to the public eye in 1967 with the mutilation of Snippy the horse. And that was in Colorado, just about the time I moved to Colorado, actually. So And that, you may have heard of that. That was tied to UFOs. The leading headline at the time was rancher claims a flying saucer killed my horse. And it went all over the world. And that was a major meme. We'll get back to memes later. So that kind of set the stage for what became waves of mutilations. It went on, really started up in the early 70s and went on through till yesterday, basically. It's just that we're not having the big waves like we used to have. But we are still having mutilations being reported around the United States and in South America. And something going on in France, horse slashing, which may or may not be related, but it's still a mysterious event. And classic, what we call a classic mutilation is a cow is found dead, cause of death really unknown, and its various parts are excised. Typically, the genital area, the rectum is described as cored out. Tongue is often removed, one eye or one ear, various other little patches of skin here and there, and what we call a mandible cut, which is around the mouth. And then they're generally described as bloodless, drained of blood. And we'll get back to that detail later. But so this says, we're talking now, I tallied up the mutilations at one point years ago, and it came to around 6,000. And I think that's a very low ball number. A typical number that's given is 8,000 to 10,000 cases in the United States alone. So here we are. All these years later, I've been working on this for 45 years. You'd think I'd have a handle on it by now, but no. It's incredibly difficult. Very complex. And it's like my rancher neighbor in Colorado says, hell, if it was easy, everybody would have figured it out. So that's kind of where we are now. It's not easy. And it's also pretty off-putting for people, I think, because it's not like a crop circle, which is beautiful and dainty and aesthetic. It's gory and menacing, I guess you could call it. It's not a pleasant thing to behold or to be around necessarily. And that has kind of repelled paranormal type researchers over the years, I think. It's just because it's nasty. This is the basic bottom line. And somewhat, I guess scary is the word, because we really don't know what we're dealing with or who we're dealing with. And just briefly, my own progress in this business started in 1975 when there was a mutilation near my house in Colorado. And at that time, I'd been, collecting newspaper articles and started traveling around talking to sheriffs and ranchers. And the mutilation happened about a mile down the road from my house. And there were several drops of blood leading up the road toward my house. So it's like, wow, how about that? So I went and talked to the local newspaper man, and he thought, well, you should probably talk to the sheriff, but I should let you know that the sheriff thinks you're a suspect. So not only was it my first really close-hand case, but I was the major suspect. So you see a little irony there. But I'm no longer a suspect, I guess. And I became really good friends with that sheriff, and we went out and looked at cases, and he always let me know when things were happening in the area. So we continue on, but I have collected material and gone to cases over many, many years, and worked closely with Chris O'Brien on all of this. Then I would say in my own evolution of thinking about it, I actually started being interested in UFOs when I was a teenager. And I was reading Kehoe and thinking about extraterrestrials and flying saucers. And then I jumped over to Carl Jung when I was about 15 and more or less bought his explanation of UFOs, saucers being a manifestation of coming from the collective unconscious. I was a precocious 15-year-old. So I more or less cruised on that plane until I moved to Colorado and encountered the cattle mutilations. And then here we are today. So we're still trying to figure it out. But at some point, I jumped from the collective unconscious idea to more of a Gaian consciousness idea. To me, the collective unconscious wasn't quite filling the bill for explaining what I thought needed explaining. So I ended up, even back at the time of your conference, I was getting ready to talk about the Gaian mind. So, and I might add, Smiles, that I first met you, I believe, over a used book table at a conference somewhere back in the early 90s, perhaps. And I remember thinking, wow, who is this guy? He's got really good taste in books, which you do. That's one of the reasons we're here. We're trying to preserve all these dang books. But I thought, well, this is an interesting character. And we struck up a conversation. And then here we are now. How about that? Wow, we've been on a parallel track for many, many years, it seems like. And here we are getting to talk and share and compare notes. So jump right in there. How are you? First of all, I would like to give a boost to your, where is it? Oh, here we go. This little item here. Reframing the debate, on which you have an excellent article. It's just really, really fine, and I encourage everybody to read that, because it's I reread it again last night, and I'm just like, man, this is just so good. And so we have been on a parallel track for quite a long time. So I figured the two of us together, we can figure it out in the next 45 minutes and call it a day.
Yep, we're gonna wrap it up. No more conferences will ever be needed. Yeah. So that the essay, for those that aren't aware, the essay in the UFOs Reframing the Debate book, I had wanted to write something fresh for the book, but really what I ended up doing was combining the transcripts from two previous lectures I'd done in the years before that touched on all the different ideas that I thought had the most value for people trying to look forward and look at new ideas. And so by looking back, I was trying to help people look forward. And the two main ideas that I put forth, the main thrust was just a warning to people that, look, this phenomena, whatever its true source and nature, can be manipulated by human agencies for their own agendas. And so be forewarned that if you get into this, you need to keep a level head and realize that things can be faked, things can be staged, things that some folks may know enough about the nature of this phenomena to cause it to have manifestations, to poke it and prod it and make it manifest, or just imitate it themselves with some kind of technology. But I seeded the essay also with my own particular take on this Gaian UFO hypothesis. And for me, it's a little different, I think, perhaps than what you've envisioned through your research, but it's kind of a melding of this idea of Jung's collective unconscious, this manifestation, like a protean psychoid, physicalized, planetary stigmata, a planetary poltergeist of a geopsyche. I tend to think of the UFO phenomena as having always been with us, and that the way it appears to us is constantly changing based on our own expectations, our own enculturations, our own the mechanics of the noodle up here. And so we're always struggling to get a true sense of what it really is and what it's really trying to tell us. But I think, and like Jung, I think trying to read these encounters from a more symbolic hermeneutic type of interpretation can have great value. Read them like a dream, and we can maybe see what the communication is intended to tell us. Real briefly, I've got a couple of slides that I brought from a previous presentation, but there are a lot of different ideas out there. A lot of different writers have played around with this idea. This is just a small smattering. This is not to say that every one of these people talked about the Gaian Ufo hypothesis. They did not, mostly, but each of them kind of published something that touched on it. And it's a wide ranging thing, and folks can go to the Anomaly Archives and see the past presentation slides and see that. But the main point I'm trying to say is, excuse me, I think of the UFO phenomena as being a transpersonal virtual reality communications channel for a wide range of intelligences that we may be encountering upwellings from our own collective unconscious in a Jungian sense, but we could also be interacting with the consciousness of other species already on this planet that could be different parts of the animal kingdom, or what's the biggest one, if the Earth herself. And I gotta comment on the irony of the two guys on the bill today that's filled with mostly female speakers. Our predecessor Tim being the exception, and here we are talking about a global feminine entity. So, but I do think there's something to this. The specifics of it we can get into a little more.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good overview, and that group of people are really chipping at it. And I think, as we talked recently, a number of people that I really respect have nibbled around the edges of this theory, and it just seems like nobody's ever taken the full bite. And I'm willing now to take the full bite. I've heard no better theory. However, as you say in your essay, anybody that claims that they have the answer at this point, you should run from them screaming, which I'm not about to say. I know, because I don't. Every day I learn something. I find 10 other things that I don't know what the heck they're about at all. I mean, if you just read what comes over the internet every day, it's like, well, okay, the entire galaxy is one brain. Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, dark matter is actually information. It's like, oh, wow, okay. So, okay, we can get between various points in our galaxy by some sort of quantum jump through tubules of some sort of time-space warp or something. It's like, wow, that's really cool. So, I mean, how do you ever keep up with that? Just, every day it's something. So meanwhile, I just keep saying, okay, just stay focused, cattle mutilations. That's what you set out to do. Finish the job. And all this other stuff is peripheral. And one thing that I do stress about the importance of the mutilations is that, and Chris O'Brien kind of brought this to my attention, really, it's that it's perhaps the only paranormal, I'm calling it paranormal because that's what I think it is. It's the only paranormal phenomenon that provides this much consistent evidence. And we're talking a lot of evidence. We're talking thousands of cases of these dead animals out in the fields, and they're lying there, and you've got all the other peripherals that go on around them, the saucer sightings, the helicopter sightings, the cryptid sightings, every range of paranormal somehow gets attached to it in some weird way. But here we have a paranormal phenomenon that provides this much evidence. It's quite unusual because everything else is pretty fleeting and pretty ephemeral, and it's hard to get a handle on it. But here it is. It's a cow lying there, 2,000 pounds of dead meat is kind of hard to ignore. So Greg Bishop and I have discussed this, and I tell him that cattle mutilations are the key to understanding the paranormal, and the paranormal is the key to understanding consciousness, and consciousness is the key to understanding everything. So he goes, oh, wait a minute. back up. So I have to back to cattle mutilations. So that's why, but it has repelled so many people. You have to have a certain stomach for it, I guess. because it is so grisly and just downright weird. When you get to it, it's not like a crop circle. And I've been to England and looked at the crop circles, and it's like, wow, this is just so beautiful and so aesthetic and so ethereal, and it's just a wonderful feeling. You go out and look at the dead cow, and you go, ooh, ah. Not only did the rancher lose a huge part of his livelihood, but you don't quite know who's really behind this or what their agenda is or where you might fit into that agenda. Are you getting in the way of this? I took a big step there in which I said just now that I'm calling this a paranormal phenomenon because I just can't. I've tried every way I can to what I call rationalize it into being some sort of human-based, say the government being a prime suspect, military operations, biowarfare testing. This was my original theory when I got into it in 75. It was it's sure, and people like Ed Sanders and that published some good stuff back then. He was pretty convinced that this was biowarfare agents and weaponry testing being done on these cattle. So I thought, well, yeah, probably. You've got the helicopters, got all this stuff happening like that. It sure looks like some sort of military intelligence covert action of some sort. But boy, not being in it very long, I realized that it was way beyond that. And nothing over the years has disabused me of the notion that this is just impossible, nearly, to say that it could possibly be done by any human agency that we know of. It's just too perfect. So the other way to go in that route would be, okay, we'll back up another step. Let's just say it's a collective delusion, which has been one of the popular theories to explain it, that just some sort of mass delusion in which suddenly thousands of people and ranchers who've been in it all their life say, go out and look at this cow and say, whoa, something carved up Bessie here, and this sure ain't no coyote. And suddenly thousands of people did that, the newspapers and everybody else got onto it, and everybody was totally deluded for 30, 40 years. So, and still deluded. It's like, well, that's kind of hard to figure too. That doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was, in a way, it was intellectually dishonest. I was trying to buy my way out of it. It's like, okay, you were fooled. It's a delusion. Pack it up, go home, move on to something else. But I just can't do that. Like I say, it would just be a real cop-out at this point to go down that road because I know better.
Yeah, and I will say, the cattle mutilations is specifically as a phenomena is one of those things that I have really struggled with, and I have not, for the very reasons you outlined, not dove into it. It's so visceral, it's so gory, and it's so contradictory, like the UFO phenomena itself, in so much as, okay, so just like when pilots see something, I mean, okay, no appeals to authority, pilots aren't better witnesses. Well, sure they are. I mean, they're at least trained to operate in an environment that you or I are not necessarily, unless you happen to be a pilot, very trained in. And so it's kind of like, well, it's the nature of people's kin, that your everyday experience. And so when it's like with Mac Brazel and Roswell, he was used to seeing, he'd already picked up weather balloons off his property and taken them to get the reward for it. So of course he would have recognized a slightly more weird weather balloon as being just a slightly more weird weather balloon. The same with the ranchers. Ranchers work with these animals. They've seen, animals that have been attacked by coyotes, wolves, and other predators, or died of other circumstances. And so for them to suddenly and seemingly in such large numbers and in these weird pockets of activity be misidentifying this, I mean, okay, so then they're all just out for insurance money? It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, obviously there can always be a few hoaxes or misidentifications or paranoia, whatever, But yeah, on this scale, it just doesn't seem likely. And I joked about endangered species, this mainstream but kind of lower tier B movie science fiction dealing with the cattle mutilations, and starting off with the idea of there's lights in the sky, and that's the UFO connection. There's always been these weird flying contraptions and lights associated with these, but where it gets paranormal, seemingly, are so many of these cases where there's just not enough time for humans seemingly to have been able to move in, do these kinds of operations with this alleged such precision, exsanguination, all these different things. I mean, I've heard skeptics who I trust that they're being intellectually honest and feel like they've come up with an explanation for this aspect and this aspect and this aspect. But I still always come away going, yeah, but not everything. Like, there's just too much. And so that does tend to get me into the paranormal field. And while I don't respect Linda Howe's research acumen as much as I used to, I still remember her describing some of these cases, and literally they just seen a calf, and then a few minutes later there's some weird activity that's like a whirlwind, and then they go and they find the body, and it's like that. I mean, or these other cases where people are in the house, they just taking care of the animals outside, they go inside, they hear a commotion, they come outside. And or these cases where there's no tracks and something looks like it's dropped from the air. And again, you can try to say, helicopters and stealth copters and, like you say, biowarfare research or whatnot. But again, unless that's part of a psychological warfare campaign, it makes no sense, because they could just as easily be experimenting on their own cattle on government land and never bother any ranchers. So, I mean, you have to invoke either wild conspiracy theories to come up with a good explanation, or, oh darn, I got to replace it with the paranormal hypothesis, because I just don't know, because it's just so weird.
Right.
And there are so many people. This guy, Tom Bearden, was one of these who, to me, he seemed like a paranoid who was all very anti-Soviet, but he also had some very interesting ideas when it came to this, and the idea that the collective unconscious could be at play. And he went so far as to suggest, again, here's that little thing where that somehow the collective unconscious and the psyches of Americans and Russians, and this is all pre, fall of the Berlin Wall, Cold War stuff. Right. Somehow this was creating like a poltergeist, like a planetary poltergeist that was physicalizing all this pushed down energy, and then it's erupting in this way that's just grotesque and horrifying, and we want to look away because we're like, no, I don't want to think about that. And that's most people's response.
Well, I'm glad you put that up there. I was going to talk about him a little bit. I had met him back in the day, because I used to go to Tesla conferences, and that's where I met him, because he was a big Tesla guy. But I got to talk to him for a while about it. And I said, well, this is where the idea of tulpas comes in.
Yes.
For a while, that was kind of like the word that we used for these so-called manifestations. And I'm glad you are the first one to use that word, because it's a very key word in this business right now. But talking to him, I said, I asked the obvious question. Okay, so the collective unconscious, it pushes down through those layers showed in that chart, and it's the collection point for human anxiety and fearfulness, I guess. In our case, it was our fear of the Russians. And that pushes out some other symbol up to this other pneumatic tube of psychisms, and it comes out as a cattle mutilation, and that it's basically a warning that they're out to the cow represents, say, the motherland and the milk and the pleasant part of feeding America, and that it's our lifeblood. It's the cow, after all. So I said, well, there's got to be, what is the actual physical mechanism of this tolpoidal entity? He says, there is no mechanism. It's instantaneous. There is no mechanism. And I was like, oh, okay. He said, well, I described it as like, you mean the matter, the atoms in the cow and everything just rearranges itself instantaneously into what we call a cattle mutilation? He went, yeah. I went, whoa, okay. Now that's a huge leap. That is a huge leap. But just on the subject of tulpas, excuse me, I had the occasion to meet the Dalai Lama one time, and it's really weird because I was introduced to him and shook his hand, and we looked each other in the eye, and he just started laughing hysterically. And I didn't know if he was laughing at me or what. Then I started laughing hysterically. And then all the monks started laughing hysterically. And we just stood there, I don't know, for 2 or 3 minutes just laughing hysterically. And then we finally just said, nice to meet you. And I walked off. I never quite understood what that was about. I thought it was good. But in the course of that, I met one of the top monks, his right-hand man, really. And I asked him, what's the story on the tulpas? Because this is more or less a Tibetan concept from the works of Alexander David Neal in 1930s in Tibet. And she describes having learned how to create a tulpa, consciously create this entity, which is a fat little monk that she created, who carried her stuff through the mountains. And eventually, it was great because he was really helpful, but then it started developing a mind of its own. Yeah. And then it became troublesome and quarrelsome. And finally, she had to mentally disperse it. And so this is apocryphal at best. But I asked the monk, I said, what's the story on the tulpas? And he went, what? I said, the tulpas, the entities that you guys create that, do these things. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, oh, come on. I mean, this is a Tibetan thing. You've never heard of a tulpa, anything called a tulpa? Nope. So whether it's just a closely guarded secret, and he just didn't want somebody like a punk like me inquiring about such a thing, could well be. So they didn't really answer anything. But the key part of the Alexander David Neal thing was that the thing develops a mind and a life of its own and has a physical presence. So it may carry over. It's certainly something that I consider, that somehow these manifestations do maybe develop a life and mind of their own and intelligence of their own, independent of us and or Gaian consciousness.
Well, and this is why I mentioned in my presentation the work of Albert Budden, his electrostaging hypothesis. This again is akin to, I think, what I would describe my transpersonal virtual reality communications channel hypothesis of UFO phenomena, and also the Jungian collective unconscious idea, except his is very different. It focuses on electromagnetics as being a pollution, and that as we've polluted our environment with all this electromagnetic energy, that it is interacting with us in a kind of Michael Persinger mind affecting way, and causing us to go into these experiences. But he goes even further and speculates that the collective unconscious, I may be misstating it here, that it wants us to believe in it. And that's another recurring theme from people like John Keel and others, that the phenomena, whatever its ultimate nature, it wants us to believe in it, but in its own words, not too much. Right. But his idea is also similar to Jenny Randall's suggestion in a couple of her books, that somehow this phenomena will take everything it can from the environment, whether it be dust or larger leaves and even maybe small toys and whatnot, but we'll literally kind of create a golem out of this material, and of course with the whole idea of these balls of light, these plasma that could be malleable and sometimes morph from one shape to the other. All this put together seemingly is the possible physical mechanism of manifestation that Bearden, I thought he actually in his papers described the mechanism, but but it would say is just happening suddenly from what you've heard from direct from his mouth. But this idea that somehow this intelligence, whatever source you think it may come from, and again, we're suggesting maybe it's the planet herself, is helping manifest these things for us to engage with for some other unknown reason. And I mean, I think to me, the idea, the various possible reasons have been, well, what are the warnings that we see in the contactees? It's stop your exploding of nuclear weapons and stop living in this kind of, capitalist society that's destroying the planet. And then in the abduction narrative, it's ecological disaster and overpopulation. And one of the I think the earliest time I ever wrote Jacques Vallée was to suggest this idea, which had also come from ideas of his, and that there's again this communications channel that we're interacting with, and that there's these layers of these intelligences that we're interacting with, and they each have their agenda and their message. But it made me think, okay, if the planet is one of the sources, what is her main job? And I would think that would partly be for us as the quote unquote most advanced species on the planet, or the most likely to get off world, would be to prepare us for the inevitable confrontation or interaction with true alien others. So maybe this interacting with faux extraterrestrials is a preparation of us for that eventual contact, but also warning us to keep spaceship Earth clean and tidy and not radioactive wasteland. So those are some of the ideas that percolated up in my mind early on, and my ideas have not changed that much. I mean, I don't exclusively believe this, but this is kind of where I'm coming from.
Boy, you hit on so many good points right there, boy. You just one after another, you nailed them, man. Okay, back to the warning part. Okay. To me, the mutilations have a certain element of theatricality about them, just like a lot of paranormal type phenomena. But I really noticed it with the mutilations, that whoever or whatever was behind it could just as easily have hidden them, incinerated them. We never know the difference, but there they are laid out for us, like, okay, come and look at it. What do you think? What do you think is going on here? And one of my first papers I wrote about this was called UFOs, cattle mutilation, I think it's called Cattle Mutilations, and I didn't say UFOs, and nuclear sites, and proximity relationships. It was like a 20-page self-published thing, which was kind of following on that UFO nuke connection that goes all the way back to the contactees, and it's very prevalent. And I started putting together a map of where these incidents were happening, when they were happening. And to me, it still holds up pretty well, even though I think it put it out in 1982. It's still, I look at it and go like, wow, that's still where the mutilations are happening, and here's the nuclear sites, and here's the missile silos, and here's the uranium mines, and this is downwind, and so on and so on. And now even the drones have entered the picture, which I call mystery drones, because they're buzzing our nuclear facilities, both commercial and military. So I'm calling them the new UFO in a sense. But the warning part, I was telling, I can't remember who I was talking to about it, but I was talking about the conclusion of NIDS, National Institute of Discovery Science, that we all, I think, know and love. That after 7 years of studying something like the Sherman Ranch, Skinwalker Ranch, when Colin Kelleher wrote his final report, which led to his book Brain Trust, he basically said, look, we don't know. Here's the subtext. We spent millions of dollars. We threw every PhD we had in the book at this question. 7 years of these reports and investigations and necropsies of cattle. His conclusion was that the mutilations represented a warning. He said, I don't know who did it. Not going to even venture down that road in terms of who it was. But here's what the bottom line is. It is a warning, and that warning is that our food chain has been compromised. He thought by prion-type mad cow Alzheimer diseases, and that he wrote a whole book about it, which is a really good book and really interesting. And that's what we were being warned of by the cows being discovered and reported on and entering the public consciousness. And that's sort of where he ended up with it, which I thought, okay, well, yeah, they're a warning, but I'm not sold on the idea that the food chain is actually compromised, but obviously it's got some problems with the junk that they end up, antibiotics and chemicals of every variety that they ingest, that we ingest. But to me, the nuclear thing still does hold up to a great degree. And this is where we're kind of pedaling along. But I think there is also a social engineering aspect, which you cover so well in your essay, which it's hard to separate sometimes between what the actual phenomenon event is and for what purpose it's serving. It could be serving dual purposes. And excuse me, I've been working on a book with Adam Gorightly. He was on the list for the original conference, wasn't he?
Yes, and he did make an appearance for the Hill in the Hole screening.
No, I'm talking about the 2001.
Oh, yes, the National UFO Conference, yes.
Anyway, he's reluctant to plug his own book, but I worked on that book for about a year with providing sources and firsthand recollections, because that was the period he was covering, was the 1970s and 80s. And the name of the book is Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks, UFO Disinformation in the Age of Aquarius. And he focuses a lot on this social engineering aspect. I wrote the foreword to the book, so I get more into what you're talking about, Smiles, in your book here, that the mutilations could serve as a dual purpose. Not only were they getting samples, in the case of Dulce, for instance, and the Dulce-based myth, all of that business, they were getting samples of those cows to figure out how contaminated they were from the gas buggy explosion. But they're also realized, hey, this is a Class A paranormal playground up here, and we can run all kinds of social engineering programs. If we want people to believe in UFOs, here's a way to do it. So Adam really examines very closely the whole history of government involvement in paranormal, how it's being used and manipulated for social engineering purposes, which you have been into from the start, it seems like.
And it was Valet who probably first got me, thinking along those lines and thinking about the issue of, like I warned at the very outset, that whatever the nature of the true UFO phenomena, there are faux, F-A-U-X, false UFOs phenomena, or again, maybe the true phenomena itself can be poked and cajoled into action. This actually goes back to yet another thing from the lecture, and that was the citing of, I believe it was in Greg Bishop's interview with Dean Radin about a conversation he had with Valet, where he was talking about psychotronic devices and how he was aware of technology that could affect the local geomagnetic environment and thus possibly affect the geopsychic environment. And again, this gets back to this idea of a geopsyche. That I'm not sure who first came up with the term, but the first place I probably heard about it was Canadian researcher Michael Persinger and his whole idea of this God helmet, the way of stimulating parts of the brain with electromagnetics and inducing similar experiences to the felt, sensed presence, levitation, and the sense of somebody else, an alien other being there. But again, Valet and others who I really respect have talked about these ideas in this 5 arguments against the extraterrestrial origin that he published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration back in 1990. I proposed the approach to the phenomena as a control system. And again, his idea of a control system, I think, goes right to this idea of the UFO as a Gaian entity. Yes, where is it? They can be found in the terrestrial, ecological, and economic balancing mechanisms that rule nature, some of which are well understood by science. This theory admits two interesting variants. An alien intelligence, possibly Earth-based, could be training us towards a new type of behavior. It could represent the visitor phenomena of Strieber, 1987, or some form of supernature, possibly along the lines of a Gaia hypothesis. And again, that the control system hypothesis, this idea that that whatever the phenomena is, it pushes us back and forth between, in his ideas, it was this idea of rationalism and superstition, science and anti-science. And, certainly we have seen a huge swing in the last 4 years, but just how easily people's belief systems can be swayed towards anti-science, superstitious thinking. Not that again, not to criticize or get political, but all of these things I think are integrally related.
Yeah.
And I when I talk about the Gaian thing, there were reasons that I always kind of went towards it, and that was humanity's shamanism technology for communication with the environment and the ancestors. This idea, this animist idea that we can, that there is intelligence all around us, that everything is consciousness. And this is just an Eastern philosophical idea at the heart. And that balls of light represent the spirits of the dead, the disembodied elders, or wandering disembodied consciousness. And to say even disembodied when one realizes that it all is one, and information and energy is kind of ridiculous, which takes me back to Paul Devereaux, the Earthlights Researchers Conference in London, where he was just so frustrated that people were still talking in these materialistic terms about when we already had enough evidence to take us to the next level. But there's just so many things, and these are just some of my checkpoints about, again, the connection between electromagnetics and Earth-generated luminous phenomena, and time and time again, this inner Earth mythology, whether it's the alien underground or even human underground bases in Dulce or other places, or the myths of Mount Shasta and Shambhala and all these inner Earth ideas, and so much. And Valet talked about this with like the contact experiences in UFO close encounters, where, people very often would suddenly find themselves inside of a saucer. Well, they assumed it's a saucer, but sometimes it seemed like it was just underground. And this serpent imagery that comes up, whether it's the emblems on the uniforms of the entities, or other aspects of the UFO phenomena, and the Kundalini awakening aspect, and it just on, and the buzzing sounds of this. So and one of my favorites, the hegemonic hierarchies of the occult spirit world. Why is there so much about this hierarchicalness that on the one hand seems so, militaristic, but when you look at the way science looks at nature, we look at it in terms of hierarchies of evolution and the ecology of all living things. It's a higher, this eats this, eats this, eats this,
Right.
It's munchies all the way down. And the reproductive obsession, that's another, and that's in the parts that are taken in the cattle mutilation incidents.
There is that. Well, it's boy, you hit them all. You hit them all right there. The one that I early on, though, just to clarify a little bit, I had my evolutionary imperative theory. This was early 80s also. And I got really into the study of memes and how memes move culture and move belief systems. So not only could we be whatever human hierarchies might want to manipulate the belief system, Gaia itself might want to manipulate the belief system through the memes, which the UFO and the cattle mutilation are forever wedded. We'll never entirely separate them. But I'm just thinking, like locally, manifestations of these memes. First of all, Chris O'Brien and I collect these imagery that's used in advertising, and you see it everywhere, of a cow being sucked up into a UFO in a beam of light. And it's just, we've got hundreds of them now. They just use them for everything. And the one that really tickled me was the Albuquerque, the Parade of Lights that they have every year. And the main attraction was the big display they had, and it was a flying saucer sucking a cow up in a beam of light. And then it said, "Fun for the whole family." And I'm going like, wow, that's you realize what's going to happen to that cow. It's going to end up back on the ground mutilated. But no, it's just fun. It's going up in the UFO. What the heck? And then, somebody in this state took the time to go and stencil a UFO. Every one of those cow signs, those yellow cow road signs, they stenciled a beam of light and a cow being sucked up into a UFO. That cow on being sucked up, and it's hundreds of them, hundreds, miles and miles and miles. Who took the time to do that and why? But I don't know. But the idea being that we are, it's like Terence McKenna said, the great goal of human history is to become a spacefaring civilization, so that we are preparing ourselves, as you say, to either contact eventually these entities that we're contacting in some mode, energetic mode at this point, or physically contact them or whatever. But as you were saying earlier, we need to believe a little, But and we also have to, as a society, be consolidated enough, assuming we're going to leave the planet in metallic craft, and actually fly to Mars and elsewhere. We need a pretty organized society to gather the resources and impetus and finances and whatnot to actually make that happen. And to do that, you have to juice it with a belief system that we're going to find life over there. We're going to find other intelligence in the universe. We're going to go out and explore the universe and colonize it like Star Trek. And we're going to have fistfights on the bridge of the Enterprise with Captain Kirk and the aliens. I mean, so I don't know. Science fiction, all of that gets thrown in there and develops these what I call meme plexes, which gently nudge the society along in cultural directions, which could be a biological survival strategy of sorts, even if it's coming from an unconscious place, our own unconscious, collective unconscious, or the planet saying, we got to get off this planet. Eventually, now we know it will be destroyed. We can't put all our DNA eggs in one basket. We've got to spread it out. Gaia may be thinking, if Gaia indeed thinks that way. But the big debate is still in Gaia. Lovelock had to tone it down. He said, okay, it's a provisional theory. I in no way intended it to be taken as a sentient being or having an intelligence of its own. It's like, okay. That's because he got attacked from the right, I guess you'd call it, in the scientific community, saying it was environmental Satanism and trying to establish a new religion and just all kinds of nonsense. It's a teleological substitute for Christianity or something. But so he had a lot of blowback on it, so he had to back off that position. But I'm not backing off. I think all of that is true. But I got nothing to lose at this point. He's 100 years old. He doesn't have much to lose. So I think he had it right the first time. In fact, he had to tone it down. Now it's called Earth System Science, and it's taught in the universities. And they've tried to get rid of the word Gaia because it's a little too mystical. And we can live with that word, I suppose, although I don't think of my research as being mystical, oddly enough. In fact, I get criticized for reductionism and scientism by even trying to figure it out. I'm taking enchantment out of the world, right?
Well, and so we're pretty close to the end here, and I think we've both mentioned McKenna And here is from an interview that he did with Jeffrey Mishlove, who's doing news shows, or even as we speak.
Yeah.
And McKenna says in that interview, one possible view of the flying saucer is that it is a kind of projection from the consciousness of the planet, that it is Gaia. And Mishlove starts invoking, psychokinetic research, parapsychological research, and says they still might, in some manner, be projections of the human mind. And McKenna is like, well, yeah, but almost as though the UFO is a manifestation of Gaia as mother goddess. Again, this all just comes back to this idea that parapsychological data, if it's to be believed, can affect physical matter, can result in these tulpas, protean psychoid phenomena, these physicalized thought forms. And I often just would posit to people that there is a kernel of truth to every mythology, every spiritual belief, and every superstition. That does not mean you should bite into that wholeheartedly and believe it's the absolute truth. Again, McKenna and Philip K. Dick and Robert Anton Wilson, especially Robert Anton Wilson, was one of these people who just said, paradigms are just glasses. You put them on so that you can see certain patterns, and they are useful for a time or for certain circumstances. And I think that the Gaian hypothesis, the idea that there is a parapsychologically connected ecology on this planet, that we are all part of an ecology of living systems, and you can reduce that to a materialistic, a mechanistic paradigm, or you can put it in a mystical, spiritual paradigm, but it still comes to the same conclusion that there are living systems here, and whether or not you want to ascribe consciousness to some or all or just us, we're interacting with that, and people have been interacting with it forever. Protean psychoid phenomena, baby. Yes, Stephanie.
Yay. That's a good bumper sticker. Well, I think you're onto something, and I'm myself becoming more vocal about it, because I see how this way of thinking about the Earth, for instance, may well be needed at this time in our history, because we're running into a real problem with our clock ticking on our supposed 10 years before we have irreversible climate collapse, basically. And so it's like, okay, I think maybe we ought to put a little more thought into this. And I think Gaia is one way of doing that. And whether it can explain paranormal phenomena, which I think it can to a great degree, it could certainly explain the physical processes at work. And just studying that to me is just a constant source of amazement. What is actually going on here? In every inch of soil, there are a million microorganisms and 100 miles of mycelia. And it's like, wow, everything has just got this connection. As you say, it's all got a form of consciousness, which interweaves with our own individual consciousness, the supposed collective unconscious. It's all part of the same deal. So I can't at least keep separating those and compartmentalizing each of those areas, that you've got to take it all or nothing. So I think it's time that we spend more time thinking about it from a strictly ecological point of view. And I think it has great promise in terms of understanding paranormal phenomena.
I do too, and I'm so glad that we've had this opportunity to talk about it. We probably have a moment or two for any questions. I haven't seen anything bubble up, but there's been definitely a lot of discussion in the chat. Some about the discussion. Yeah, Stephanie basically said what I've been trying to say. Oh, why can't people produce UFOs as well as Gaia, animals, plants, dead people? Maybe it's more of a skill or creating a vehicle for communication. That's why I say it's a transpersonal virtual reality communications channel that enables us to interact with the perhaps individual consciousness and collective unconsciousness of various things on this planet and elsewhere, even though elsewhere is an old world paradigm model.
Right. I noticed the skeptics are quit using the term life force because they think it's too woo-woo or whatever. It's like, I was trying to get away with saying the life force, and no, we don't say that anymore. No life force. But I don't know. It's like the words betray us sometimes. We get to this point And the terminology, it just doesn't really cover it anymore. And we just have to be really inventive and thinking of ways to express these kind of ideas. It's just not that easy. It's like we can't even define what life is, for that matter. We can't really define what consciousness is. Still, I went to 10 years of consciousness conferences, and I walked away, and I was like, well, what is it? Where is it? The only thing I remember is like, oh, it resides in every single cell of your body. It's not just in your head. So maybe we can create UFOs. Maybe we're doing it unconsciously. Maybe we're part of a consortium of some sort that creates the local UFO. And what happens in our dream states, in our unconscious states, that's what is really fascinating me right now, as a way to get at it.
Yeah. We do have a question from Twee Snyder. With crop circles, you hear about faked ones versus real ones. Are there any faked cattle mutilations that you're aware of, or are they of a consistent quality?
I would say there are just so few faked cattle mutilations, if any. We have, some peripheral items that crept into the overall oeuvre, which is cultist activity, which is just minimalist in this whole scheme of things. And I mean, bringing down a cow in the middle of the night and doing anything is no easy feat.
Yeah.
I did. Well, as long as Tui was up there, I wanted to thank her for her 1897 airship wave talk, which was really fun. I actually meant to mention that because to me it was such a precursor to the mutilations and the current modern UFO era, and I think it deserves intense scrutiny. Not only was it the first meme of a cattle mutilation, which was the Alexander Hamilton being pulled up into the UFO, but it's a technology that was just slightly ahead of its time. It was something that's pulling us into our future, and assuming that technology is what's going to get us off the planet, maybe it has this guise, the phenomenon cloaks itself in the cultural milieu of its time, and it's just slightly ahead of its time, just like the airships were. And perhaps the flying saucer itself is.
One last quick question from Red Pill Junkie. Has anyone undertaken a sort of wonders in the sky study to find examples of cattle mutilations reported in ancient times? Of course, you just mentioned one, which I was like, perfect.
Right. Well, the ones that fascinate me, Chris and I are always digging around in Babylonian texts and all this kind of stuff, trying to find stuff. And I'm cave painting walls. I mean, we find these incredible things that are just really hard to explain. They're 26,000 years old, and it's what looks like a little alien standing at the rear end of a auroch, and with one leg missing off the cow, and it's like, what is that supposed to represent 26,000 years ago? I don't exactly know. So there's quite a few examples of those, but just not enough to be definitive. I mean, it's certainly, people have tried to fake them. Those are a few things people have tried to fake. And I spotted them on the internet and said, nope, that is fake. Don't post that crap again. You're not helping. So it's like, oh, okay, sorry. But I wouldn't say that the historical record is actually teeming with examples of cattle mutilations, although this is Chris O'Brien's cup of tea in terms of tracing the humans' relationship with cattle back past and through and past biblical times. And this is really interesting stuff, which we don't have time for right now, but that's why I say get Stalking the Herd. He's got it all in there. It's just fascinating material. I think you all would really love it. Read the foreword. Of course, all of his 5 books. That's kind of tracks my thinking about all of this. And I do hope we get to meet up again. And thank you so much, Smiles, for putting this all together. And people, please contribute, and let's do this. Let's get this done. We don't want to have another case of everything ending up in a dumpster somewhere. We just got to, this is important that we preserve this material and deal with it appropriately. And Smiles has been right at the forefront of this for years and years. We've got to support him in this project. Come on, dig deep. Let's do it.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Well, we will talk again very soon. I really appreciate you being a part of this.
That was great.
All right, folks. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, David. We've got coming up in just a little while is my good friend Susan Lepselter. Thank you so much, David Perkins, and we'll be right back. Oh, here's some information on some great gifts. So if you give right now over a certain amount, you can get some great stuff. Check this out.